As you're aware, the weather is out here is pretty blistery and in a state of flux this March. You know, March is a transition month. A lot of weather happens. It's blistery, and in coincidence, that's probably what's happening in Washington, D.C. I'm proud to announce that today's speaker is the Honorable Congressman Pat Tiberi. He's addressing us today on current congressional matters, including spring updates. Hopefully this will include some calm and warming news, though March traditionally brings unsettling high winds and overcast skies. Pat is a senior member of the House Ways and Means Subcommittee that has jurisdiction over tax issues. He currently chairs the House Ways and Means Subcommittee on Select Revenue Measures. Pat's the son of American immigrants. Congressman Tiberi is a lifelong resident of our district, which is number 12. He's a graduate of OSU in 1985, lives in Columbus with his wife Denise and 4 daughters. Let's please welcome Congressman Pat Tiberi.
Thank you. Great to be with you. Thank you for all you do as Rotarians, and it's an honor to be with you today. It's an honor to represent both the cities of Dublin and Worthington, where most. So, as I've done in the past, I'd like to just kind of give you information. I don't think there's enough opportunities to give Americans the fiscal picture that needs to, quite frankly, be addressed. It's not being addressed. And so I have some slides for you on that. But I also have some slides on the healthcare law. Because what I was finding over the last several months is that I would get all questions, or a lot of questions. Maybe I think I could probably talk loud enough. Yeah. That's good. You want to sit there? That's usually half the pot. So, I've been getting a lot of questions on the healthcare bill, so I got a few slides on that, and then more importantly, I want to open up for questions, because I was telling Lynn, we just spend the next hour talking about foreign policy, let alone all the other things that are going on. So, with that, let me give you a quick update. You've seen this before, but it deserves repeating. This is the federal budget. Discretionary spending versus mandatory spending. Discretionary spending is here. Mandatory spending is here. Mandatory spending keeps growing. Discretionary spending gets squeezed. And we are having that debate as we speak. So this is just a breakdown of some of the mandatory, 2 big pieces of discretionary. Defense is about half. Non-defense is everything else. $3.4 trillion budget. Next slide. So we've got this Pac-Man problem. I've showed you this before. This goes back to 1970, where 42% is mandatory autopilot spending, 58% is discretionary. Now you go to the most recent chart. It's actually now 65 auto, 35 discretionary in that last chart. But as of 2012, you can see the autopilot spending is gobbling up all the other spending, and it continues to worsen. If you go back to the first year of the Kennedy administration, this was flipped, meaning the brown was about 64, and autopilot was about 36. So we're not addressing the fundamental structural problem in Washington that's causing our debt and deficit. And here's an interesting way of looking at this. This right here, this autopilot, will you go back, Walter, to the last slide? This right here was subject to that sequester that you heard all about. That sequester, which was an agreement between the House Republicans and the President, caused tightening of spending, only affected discretionary, didn't affect this. So it was remarkable that for 4 years in a row, hasn't happened since the Korean War, so since before I was born, this hasn't happened. We cut discretionary spending, which is what we control in Congress on a year-to-year basis, 4 years in a row. Not cut the increase, but we actually cut from year to year. And so people say, well, how did you cut spending, and yet the deficit went up, or the debt went up? Because this grew twice the rate of inflation. So we cut this, But the debt story, because this is a bigger part of our spending. Next slide. Next slide. So I've told you this before too. Part of it's really nobody's fault. It's demographics. So back in 1950, we had 2.5 workers for every Social Security recipient. And in 2009, 3 workers for every recipient. And by the way, it's under 3 now, and it's headed to 2. At the same time, you have fewer people working to support each retiree. Life expectancy's gone up, which is a good thing. People are living longer, so they're in retirement longer. Now, this is an issue just at the federal level with Social Security and Medicare. It's also an issue with the private sector pensions. It's also an issue with state-run pensions. If you watched in Ohio, we have 5 public pensions. All 5 of them have faced the exact same problem that we are facing at the federal level as well. They've tried to address them, and they're continuing to address them. Next slide. So the President actually made a speech on this issue as it relates to Medicare, which is, by the way, more difficult shape than Social Security. If you look at the numbers, Medicare in particular will run out of money, and we will not be able to sustain a program no matter how much taxes go up. I mean, it's not an option for us to just sit by and do nothing. That was July of 2011. We're now in 2014 in March, and we've really done nothing to address this issue of mandatory spending, in which Medicare is one of them. Next slide. This is one that my mom and dad go really crazy over, and went at my mom and dad before. My mom and dad are both on Medicare. Really, really important program. Medicare operates differently than Social Security. There's an assumption by a lot of Americans, both young and old, that Medicare and Social Security are kind of like the same, and they run the same. They are not. Medicare has a trust fund. Medicare doesn't have a trust fund. Social Security has a trust fund that pays Social Security benefits. And right now, that trust fund pays more benefits than it has in the trust fund. In fact, the only reason why we're able to pay benefits today is because the General Revenue Fund is paying the trust fund back for money it borrowed back long before I was in Congress. In fact, I was in elementary school at Park Malone Elementary, close to the YMCA North that G knows about so well. So I wasn't there when this started. So it borrowed, Congress and President, from the Social Security Trust Fund. We are paying that back because right now, the federal government, the Social Security Administration, is collecting fewer dollars in the Social Security Trust Fund from workers today than it's paying out to retirees. So if it weren't for the fact that the General Revenue Fund is paying that money back, people on Social Security, my mom and dad, would not get their entire benefit. And so right now, and the date keeps moving up. Right now, 2033 is the year that's set. If we do nothing, then we will have paid back completely what was borrowed from the trust fund. And at that point in time, under current federal law, here's what happens. Benefits are cut to the tune of, and I will be eligible to get Social Security at that point in time, I will get 75%, between 72 and 75% of what I'm supposed to get. And that'll be everybody, by the way. Medicare is different. Medicare was never set up to be self-sustaining. Partially sustaining, because there is a trust fund. But part of it is also supplemented by the General Revenue Fund. So if you were born in the 1940s, this is the taxes you paid in, you and your employer. This is the benefits that you're going to receive, that you are receiving. Okay? 1950s, pay a little bit more taxes, but much more benefits. 1960s, but the same amount of taxes, a lot more in benefits. And by the way, it continues to escalate. Born in the 70s, the gap widens further. Born in the 80s, the gap widens even further. And so it is one of those things within that pie chart that is structurally getting farther from its intended purpose from when it was first started. The reasons for that. Again, people living longer. than when the program was designed. That's a good thing, again, that people are living longer. Program wasn't designed for that. Fewer workers for retirees. Again, that complicates the system. What also complicates the system is the cost of health care, which Obamacare was supposed to deal with. It hasn't, quite frankly. And so cost of health care continues to rise as well. And so it all contributes to this problem that most people don't know about. Most people believe, like my mom and dad, I paid into Medicare, I want what I paid into Medicare. Well, if you were born in the 1940s, this is what you paid into Medicare. You don't want what you paid into Medicare, because you're going to get a huge cut. But that's not what people think. Next slide. So, for the very first time since I've been there, we did something to deal with mandatory spending. Again, I just showed you Medicare, but there's a lot of different other types of mandatory spending. And it was the deal that was done between Paul Ryan, House Budget Chairman, and Senate Chairman Pat Tiberi, Democrat from Washington State. So they came up with a deal that, for the very first time, dealt with, even though very small, mandatory spending, which is what we have to do. Very first time. Now, some groups on the left hated that deal because of the mandatory spending reform that we did. Some groups on the right hated that deal because we replaced sequester, or 30% of it. But we replaced 30% of sequester, which impacts discretionary spending, with mandatory spending reform. So it's not like we just walked away from it like some said we did. We didn't. And then some on the right said, well, the cut should have been more. Well, okay, maybe, but you have divided government, and everybody's got to give a little bit. And by the way, this is an important note. Conservative groups loved the first Ryan budget. It died because it couldn't get passed in the Senate. That's what it spent in 2011. The second Ryan budget spent a little bit more, passed the House, died in the Senate. This was the Senate budget that Pat Tiberi introduced. It died in the Senate. This is the budget agreement that Pat Tiberi and Paul Ryan agreed to. Look at the number. It's a lot less than this, but it's even less than this and this, which conservative groups like. They didn't like this. I'm not sure why. It's less money. And by the way, for the first time since I've been there, mandatory spending reform. What was the mandatory spending reform? Let me tell you what it was. The one was, if you are a federal employee and you got hired to the federal government after January 1st of 2014, you're going to pay more towards your pension. Hired out of pocket on a monthly basis towards your pension. The federal employees unions went crazy. But it's part of our mandatory spending problem, just like it is in this state. And so this was an agreement. The President agreed to it. Baby steps, but important first steps in dealing with the mandatory spending problem. So, next slide. So this is where mandatory spending was supposed to go, and it's hard because of the numbers, but the Ryan Murray budget, the bipartisan deal, it's less. And that's the point. It's less. Baby steps, but it's less. CBO is Congressional Budget Office. Next slide. So, healthcare. The healthcare bill, which I get a lot of questions about, more than anything else today, as it's becoming more online. Great article in the Times Reporter in Zanesville and the Journal in Mansfield demonstrated the top point, keeping the insurance you have in life. Not only are most people that are in the exchange in Mansfield and Zanesville, both now in my district, not able to get an insurance premium that covers the only hospital in the county, which is unbelievable. But they are losing their doctor. So you not only can't keep your insurance, people are losing their current insurance, but their premiums are going up because the promise was the premiums go down by $2,500. didn't happen, and there would be no tax increase. All those things have proven not to be true. The President has delayed a number of things that we don't believe he has the authority to delay through the executive order process. Now, the President has had fewer executive orders than President Bush, President Clinton, the previous President Bush, and President Reagan. Fewer executive orders. But what we are contending is the types of executive orders that he is presenting and authoring are not constitutional, because there are 3 of them right there that are laws that were passed by Congress and are being delayed by the administration. Now, the large business mandate will be coming into effect. The individual mandate is in effect. We've had, and you've read, employers have dropped their health care coverage, even though they're not required to go into the exchange yet, large ones. We've seen employers cutting jobs, hours, and wages. I have a chart for you on that. Losing spousal coverage. The largest company so far is UPS, which has dropped spousal coverage if your spouse is employed. We've seen cuts to Medicare already, and Medicare Advantage, a big fight, a bipartisan fight, by the way. Democrats in the House and Senate have joined Republicans to tell the administration not to cut Medicare Advantage programs. And then the $1 trillion in tax hikes, which have caused even some union plans to come forward and tell the President that we need to fix Obamacare. Next slide. So some of the again, unilateral changes, including since July of 2013, the President has delayed parts of his own bill 23 times. Next slide. So the bureaucracy, little funny chart here, the current, the former and current and future healthcare in Washington, D.C. Next slide. Promise, if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. Time magazine did a great study on this, and it's just simply a real problem across the country. Next slide. The Association of American Medical Colleges projects a shortage of nearly 33,000 doctors in the next 2 years. This phenomenon that's occurring is a number of sole practitioners. Because of the new mandates in the bill, pretty overwhelming for a lot of physicians. And so we are seeing small practitioners leave the field, and then other ones joining hospitals. Next slide. And then finally, big news on this. The Congressional Budget Office nonpartisan reports that up to 2 million more Americans will leave or reduce their time in the job market as the full effect of the health care bill goes into effect. So nonpartisan budget office. Next slide will show you some Ohio employers who have publicly announced what they are doing in terms of either people losing health care or hours being cut. And this is just those who are saying this publicly. There are a number of particularly private employers who aren't saying this publicly for fear of retribution. But I was just at Zane State College yesterday, and they are limiting hours to employees to less than 30 hours. Some who work more than 30 hours because of the new provision in healthcare law that redefines full-time work to 30 hours a week when it was 40 hours a week. Next slide. So, compared with the initial estimates, the Congressional Budget Office, again nonpartisan, believes in their report fewer individuals will be covered by the federal exchanges, the state exchanges. Fewer individuals will be covered by Medicaid. Fewer individuals will be covered by employer-sponsored insurance. And fewer Americans will be employed as a result of the law. And more Americans will be forced to pay the individual mandate tax. Last slide. I think it's the last slide. 29% increase in the average annual family insurance premiums over the last 5 years. This bill is supposed to lower premiums. It's continued to go up. If you talk to people in the insurance industry, it's going to continue to go up, unfortunately. And I talked to a CPA 3 days ago who represents a number of small employers. When I say small, 10 to 250, she said, is the average size. And the number of new taxes and forms to fill out that's just beginning because of Obamacare is pretty startling for her. And so she is ultimately passing that cost on to her customers as well. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have with respect to healthcare or any other issue. Yes?
A couple of factoids. One, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal last week that pointed to the declining trend in average work hours per week. And this is a very important piece of data that tends to be overlooked. We know all the problems with the unemployment rate. It doesn't count people who've dropped out of the workforce. But it turns out that, so we've had this steady decline in average work hours. And if you multiply that, in effect, by the number of people counted as working full or part-time, total employment has actually gone down in 3 of the last 6 months.
Correct.
So this is an underreported story, but with direct implications for family earnings and this sort of thing.
Correct.
And then I think I read this correctly. The increase in premiums in the last year, when we started to implement this law, was greater than the combined cumulative increase in health insurance premiums for the previous 8 years combined. So not larger than the average increase during the past 8 years,
but
that's right. Larger than the cumulative. But as they say, not other than that.
You're from Oregon?
Yeah.
The People's Republic of Oregon?
The home of the wackadoodles.
Yes, sir.
Congressman Tiberi, what do you feel is earmarked the long-term effect of Mr. Putin putting together the Soviet Union the way it was before and what he's doing over there right now?
Great question regarding Putin and the long-term effect. This is a real problem. Not just for America, but for the rest of the free world. And this guy's been up to no good for a long time. Remember how he used timing. Well, first off, remember what George W. Bush said. I looked into his eyes and I saw his soul, and I think he's a pretty good guy. Well, I mean, he just completely buffled him, right? And between the president, the 2012 presidential race, President Obama getting elected, President Bush being in office, 2008, remember, at that pivotal time is when Putin went into Georgia and took part of Georgia. That's now part of Russia. And then, right after the Olympics, right after the situation in Syria, during the situation in Syria, after President Obama hit the reset button with Putin and how we were going to negotiate with him, he did the same darn thing now the second time to the second U.S. president. Clearly, his motives, we know what his motives are, right? I think everybody knows what his motives are. And this is a real problem. When you look at cumulatively what we have done, the messages that we've sent to that part of the world. Remember when this president first went into office, he basically said, we're going to take down this missile defense that protects our Eastern European friends, including Ukraine, the Poles, the Lithuanians, the Estonians, and we're going to have this warm new relationship. Well, those people are scared to death that they're going to be the next Ukraine, and let alone what's still going to happen potentially in Ukraine. We have limited options as to what we can do at this point in time with respect to Putin. And at the same time, you have the Putin issue. You have North Korea continuing to saber rattle. You have Iran, who, in my opinion, and others' opinion, is following the pattern of North Korea with respect to nukes. You've got the situation in Syria where the president drew a red line, and the red line's been crossed. And you've got the rest of the world and the problems. And think about this: in Afghanistan, in Iraq, we have men and women shed blood. They wouldn't sign a mutual force agreement with us, which is just, again, stunning because of a lack of respect, I think, with respect to who we are and what we're all about. So it's not just Russia and Putin that we should be concerned about. It should be much broader than that. And we got to work really hard with our allies. But at the same time, Lynn and I were talking about this. At the same time that all of this is happening around the world, we have a defense budget that's being really cut to the bone that will be smaller than any time in my lifetime over the next several years. And I'm not talking about just ships and aircraft in tanks. I'm talking about personnel. The smallest number of Marines, the smallest number of Air Force, the smallest number of Army, and a fight between the Pentagon and what's really, I think, a precious part of American defense culture, and that's the Guard. The 50 guards run by governors are fighting with the Pentagon over the future of what the National Guard's going to look like and their pretty important role in national defense. And that hasn't gotten much publicity either, quite frankly, at this one time. So this is a debate that's going to be ongoing, not just in the next 2.5 years as the remainder of the Obama presidency, but I think during the next presidential campaign. It's going to be much bigger. Yes, sir?
If the government had not borrowed or taken the money that the American people put into Social Security when it started out, would we be talking about the problems we have Social Security today?
Yes, because of the demographic issue. So it might not be as front and center as it is today, but yes, we would be talking about it because the same issue would be occurring. Because Social Security was never designed to have people live on it for 30 years. Remember, when Social Security first was passed, the retirement age for Social Security was 1 year less than life expectancy. Now life expectancy is 79, and people retire at 62. And then you have much fewer workers. We have the lowest fertility rate in our country's history today. People are having fewer kids. And we have a lower immigration rate than we had. So you've got fewer people, even projected into the future, fewer people supporting a larger group of people who are living longer than ever. And that's going to continue. It's not just going to stop. That life expectancy is going to continue to go up. So, yes, it would have made a little bit of difference, but it wouldn't have stopped the trend. Because we're paying it back with interest. Back to sport.
If in theory every American has health insurance, hospital, what's called indigent care should go away. If that happens, will nonprofit hospitals lose their nonprofit status?
Not all hospitals have a nonprofit status. Majority do, but not all do. Some of the largest hospitals in America are for-profit. But this is probably a debate that has yet to come full circle as the health care bill continues to unfold. The Senator from Iowa, Chuck Grassley, has been a former finance chair member, has been one who has brought this issue up in the past. And so I think it's probably going to come up in the future as we deal with this issue. But here's the sad little truth right now, according to the Congressional Budget Office, is when this bill, the Affordable Health Care, was passed, one of the major stools of it was health care costs for those who are poor or don't have insurance is very high because people go to emergency rooms. So if we give them health insurance and access to primary care physicians through Obamacare, then theoretically insurance will come down. That was one of the big stools of it. We're not seeing those numbers. What's ironically happening is a lot of people who had insurance before who were young, now the insurance for them is going to be much more expensive, and so they're choosing to pay the mandate, the tax mandate, rather than have insurance. So the premiums aren't coming down because a lot of young people aren't entering the pool. The theory was if young people enter the pool, those sick uninsured will pay less and everybody else will pay less. Well, that's not happening. And so two things are happening. That's not happening, and some of those people who are eligible still aren't signing up, or if they are signing up and they are on insurance and they're getting subsidies, so they're not paying anything, they're still using the emergency room, even though they have insurance, which is still pretty costly. So that's part of what we're working through right now. But that issue will be dealt with, I think, in the future. Oh, my friend.
Yeah, well, actually,
I didn't know you were here.
amazingly, I agree with what you said on some aspects.
Uh-oh. Don't tell anybody. You just did.
No, the Medicare, look, I've been retired now for 18 years. All right? I had both Medicare.
We're losing
It's kept me alive. I got stents. I got medicine. Okay, so it's perverse. Medicare is perverse, and Social Security. The question is this: I have a daughter in Mansfield, and I have a son who is a physician, solo physician. Well, it is the insurance companies that have cut the physicians and the hospital. It isn't the program. And so you keep your insurance if you like it. Well,
no, you don't.
I know, because the insurance companies are the ones who cut.
They responded to incentives.
My son in Denver, Colorado, not in Denver, California, tells me that the hospitals are giving up all the individual doctors.
Right.
Okay, but that is the hospitals who do it. Right. To blame the bill.
Well, you know why? You know why the hospitals are doing it?
Of course, because that way they get more money for the side issues for the
Okay, let me back. Do you know why the doctors are doing that?
Well, as a matter of fact, my son says he doesn't get many more people, but he's wondering about having to go for the hospital because of all the other things. It is not part of the bill. It is what the hospitals have done. What has happened with this bill is that there's too much allowance for freedom of whatever, of setting the rates.
Yeah, freedom's a bad thing.
Yeah. Well, you can't do it two ways.
Let me challenge you on it. Let me challenge you. So the bill basically said if you're an insurance company today, even if you're self-insured, meaning that your company is providing it and you design your plan and your people like it, if it doesn't include these certain things, you have to change your plan. It's not in compliance. In fact, the president delayed this. I mean, he was really smart politically because he said, I'm going to delay all these plans that are not in compliance if the state in which you live agrees and if the insurance company agrees. And he did that late last year. The problem is all those insurance companies have been planning for 3.5 years to comply with the law. So they got rid of all those plans. They don't have those plans anymore. So if you liked your plan, guess what? You couldn't keep it. But what's worse than that is, if you're an employer, and he's delayed some of this as well, you had the same exact problem. And so you had, and I'll give you again, not political, a large company in Central Ohio, whose CEO and chairman you would all know, very involved in healthcare, said to his HR person, I don't want to change a thing with respect to our healthcare. I don't want to change a thing. Whatever we have to do, I want to pay, we'll eat it. We'll eat the increase. I don't want to change our plans. Our associates love our plan. So guess what happened? The HR person figures out how they're complying with the bill. One of the things that they have to comply with is called a belly button tax. The belly button tax for self-insured plans is for every single person they have, insured, not employed, insured. So you're insured, your wife's insured, your 2 kids are insured. That's 4 belly buttons. 4 times 63 this year. Okay? For every insured in the plan. Now they don't get any benefit. There's no new benefit for them. They're just being taxed. Well, who do you think is going to be paying that tax? The employee. So that's just one example, Abe. So the HR person says to me, we did a private audit on how to comply with ACA after the mandate delay is fully requiring us to be implemented because it's delayed this year for them. So next year now. But this year, if it hadn't been delayed, the new requirements was going to cost them $9 million. So she says to me, before she talks